Hello there again, and welcome back to this lecture series on language and literacy in children with hearing loss. It's a real pleasure to be here again with you for another lecture. This time we're going to talk again about laying the foundations for early literacy. Think more specifically about parents and what parents can do and the critical importance of the early work that we do with our moms and dads in developing language and literacy in children. I'm going to talk particularly about a system that we've been using called Language ENrichment Analysis, or LENA, which some of you may be familiar with, but I'll walk you through some of the basics of the LENA system and how we're using it clinically and how we're finding it useful in helping to guide families and laying some of those foundations for early literacy development. As we've said in previous lectures, and I'm sure as you've heard over and over, children with hearing loss are really at risk for reading difficulties, language difficulties and reading difficulties. They have, of course, less access to the sound-based system, and that's a concern. They generally, on average, have weaker language, weaker vocabulary, and weaker language in terms of the form of the language. So both content and form are affected because they don't have the benefits of all of the overhearing that our kids with normal hearing have. Language sampling, we've always been taught that language sampling is a useful thing to do. It really gives us good information about language in a non-structured environment. Of course, standardized assessments as we do to monitor how our kiddies are doing, to help us select goals, and all of those kinds of things are important and useful information, and we need to be doing it as part of our work with kids. But I think more and more I'm developing an appreciation for language sampling. When I went through my own training, we used to have to do language sampling. So we'd go in and we'd do an activity with a child and we'd record a half hour or so video record a session. And then as students, we'd have to go and we'd have to work through each sentence and each line and each word and code it, and using, I think at that time we were using Tyke and Gottslieben's coding, or there was another one, developmental sentence scoring. But it took, you know, it was painstaking. It took so many hours, and I think probably many of us as clinicians have dropped it somewhere along the way. As a clinician, I always found it really, really useful, even if I only did sort of like a mini language sample and kind of did a mini, not standardized sort of sample of the child's language, that I had a sense of what are things looking like for this kid in the real world environment. So I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about how perhaps the LENA system can help us do some of that. I think probably many of you have heard about the landmark study by Hart and Riesli in 1995. And it was really important because it really did draw a lot of attention to the dramatic impact of the child's family and the learning environment on language acquisition and ultimately, of course, literacy acquisition. And so I think for many of us, it helped develop, you know, it helped sort of confirm a lot of what we've been seeing, a lot of what we've been doing, but now we sort of had the quantifiable data to do it. So it probably gave us a new appreciation, and I think also a new interest on the part of many people, not just in the world of hearing loss, but in the world of children with other kinds of disorders, in measuring, in quantifying, and talking about language enrichment. The Hart and Riesli study, just to kind of remind you, or for those who might be a little bit less familiar with it, it was a 3-year longitudinal study of not a lot of children, 42 children, but there were language samples on an ongoing basis being taken in the families' homes. There were long recordings in the families' homes. And they found, in essence, they found that children's verbal abilities were highly related to the amount that parents talked to them in the early years. Again, no surprise, but we were able to kind of finally, we know this, but we were able to kind of quantify it, or they were able to quantify it for us. And this study has had a huge impact, probably one of the greatest ones in our time. The other thing that they found was that socioeconomic status was an important predictor of language abilities. So in the Hart and Riesli study, they divided their families into 3 categories, and these aren't my terms, these are theirs. They call them welfare families, working class families, and the other title, I believe, was professional families. And they found there was a strong correlation between the kind of family, or the kind of family environment that a child was exposed to, and their language development. So for example, by 3 years of age, children in the welfare families, so children in the lower socioeconomic families, had been exposed to, so they actually were able to count the number of words that kiddies were exposed to in these language samples. They'd been exposed to 10 million words by age 3, whereas families in the so-called working class families had been exposed to about 20 million words, and then children in professional families had had exposure to 30 million words by the time they reached 3 years of age. By age 9, they went back and they reassessed these children at age 9, and they found that children's academic abilities were related to how much their children talked to them in those early years. So there's a very clear, very strong correlation between how much talking, how many words, sounds very simple, but how many words these kids had heard was related to their language abilities. So it really highlighted, I think, for us the value of collecting that kind of information about the child's language experience in a real world, a real naturalistic environment. Out of that study grew the development of something that's gaining momentum in our world and in the world of working with children who have needs in terms of language development, and that's the Language Enrichment Analysis System, or the LENA system as we call it. It was developed in 2004 by the LENA Foundation to help overcome some of the difficulties of collecting these long language samples, and to be able to really collect representative data, not just over half an hour as we would do in our preschool setting, our clinic setting, but to collect data over a whole day's worth of data in the child's real world home environment. So it's designed to collect data continuously during a full day, and it helps overcome some of those time constraints that we have when we collect language analyses and have to actually sit down and do the analysis, which is why we've often shied away from them and haven't used them maybe to the extent that we probably should have been. So the LENA system consists of a few different pieces. There's the recording hardware, which is really kind of the digital language, if you want, of the product. It's called a digital language processor, or DLP, which is a small little mini recorder that the child can wear during the day. I'll show you a picture in just a second. There's processing software that analyzes the language environment and provides quantitative measures of what's happening in that environment. And Gilkertson and Richards have provided normative data, and that normative data, I think, was collected on something like over 2,500 children. So they have age norms for typically developing children from age 2 months right up to 48 months that we can use to sort of see what does the language environment for our children look like compared to the average child. So here's just a quick snapshot for you of the LENA system. On the left of your screen there, you'll see the little recorders. We have a few different recorders that we're using in our clinical setting, and so we've just got them numbered 1 and 2 so that we don't get them mixed up. So that's a little recording device. And on the right, you'll see that LENA actually provides special clothing for the children to wear, because it really has to be secured on the child and in an appropriate position and so on. We had one situation where the little kid wouldn't wear the so-called LENA vest, which is the picture of what you see, and there's a few different sizes of those and so on, and the little recorder sits in the pocket as you see there. We had one situation where the mom couldn't get the child to wear the vest. That little 2-year-old just didn't like that color or didn't like that clothes or something. So the mom ended up trying to get the sample by carrying the recorder around. With the child, and we really and it was very clear when we did the analysis that we didn't get a good language sample. So it needs to be well secured in that kind of position. What I thought I'd walk you through is just kind of what we're doing clinically. This is not any sort of major study, and there are a number of good studies out there and so on. It's been used in studies with several populations, with children with autism spectrum disorder. It's been used in Betty Vore and people in, I believe she's in Rhode Island, have done some studies in preterm infants. Yoshinego Itano, Mary Pat Moeller, many others have been using the LENA system with children with hearing loss to collect some very useful information. And it's really useful in identifying factors that affect language development and in providing feedback to parents. And that's really where I see the main utility of the tool. It really helps us with the coaching and the counseling with the parents. So let me talk to you a little bit about just some of our experiences. I've had a doctoral student working with me collecting some of this data. And what LENA can contribute is really to help parents build a strong pre-literacy foundation. So that's what we want to use it, that language and literacy foundation that's so important. It helps measure the foundation. So how solid is what's happening? It's all very well to come into the clinic and we teach the parent and teach the parent to teach the child and do our little activities, but what's happening out there in the rest of the day in the real world? So it's kind of a bit of a window onto the family's life with their child. So measure that foundation in terms of how solid is that environment. It helps show progress. And I think in the future, and I'll come back to this, it may help us develop some good normative data for children with hearing loss. So just going to give you an example of a few cases. We first did start out with a little feasibility study. We didn't know whether parents, because they have to take home the LENA recording device and wear it and have their child wear it and use it in the home environment for a good 10 to 12 hours and throughout the whole day. We weren't sure whether or not parents would see it as a bit invasive because we're recording what's happening in that environment all the time. And so we started out doing a little feasibility study, and I'd certainly encourage you to do this if you're going to start using this this technology, just so that we could kind of get the hang of things and also know what we needed to tell parents and so on. We had a few little complications I referred to. It mostly went very well. The one family or the one child who just didn't like the color of the vest and wouldn't wear it. And a few parents told us too that, the day they happened to use it, well, it wasn't a typical day. One thing we have the parents do, and that's part of the whole LENA system, one thing we have them do is fill out a little diary. So they fill out a diary for us of what's happening kind of hour by hour in their child's lifetime. And that really helps. We can match that kind of then with the data that we're collecting from the recording to see what's going on. And it can be very informative. So let me walk through some of the results with you. So we've got this little study that we've started. We've got 13 children that we're following, and total so far we've collected data for recordings for 41 sessions. So some kiddies have 3 sessions, some 2, some only 1. We've got 5 little girls, 8 little boys. They were identified, this is a young, early identified group. They were identified on average by 4.9 months of age. They have an average, we've got a range of hearing, children with hearing aids, children with cochlear implants. The average hearing loss is about 44 decibels. 11 of them are wearing hearing aids, so most wear hearing aids, a couple wearing cochlear implants. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the population that we're working with. What LENA will collect for us is information about adult word counts, conversational turn-taking, child vocalizations. It gives us information about how much speech, and this is really, really important, how much speech the child is exposed to that's considered meaningful. And they have an algorithm for determining what's meaningful speech. It also calculates distance speech, so speech that the child is exposed to, but that's taking place at more than 6 feet or 2 meters from the microphone. It gives us information about electronic sounds in the environment, about noise in the environment, about simply silence or very low level noise, which would come under that category of silence in the environment as well. The LENA, I'm going to walk these very quick. The LENA data gives us normative data. Comes from a paper called the Natural Language Study, freely available online. I put the reference in here for you. So here's the adult words normative data. What is it that we would be expecting adults to produce in a day with their children? What's average at different stages? So here's what we've found for adult word counts. So the solid line that you see on your screen is the adult normative data, which is coming in at about, oops, don't have my glasses on, but it's coming in at about 12,000 adult words across the different ages. And the green dots are our data. So those are for our sessions, for our 13 children, what we've found. And what you see is that they are much higher than the normative data adult word counts. And that's what I mean by collecting our own normative data. And so what our therapists would say is that's a good thing, because what we say, and we've talked about this I think in other lectures, is the importance of embellishing what's happening. So we want to be doing what we do with typically developing kids, but we just want to be doing more of it in the home environment. And so what we hope to see when we get this processor back and download the information to the computer and analyze is we hope to be seeing more adult words being used than we would see on average. And so that's what we see in almost every case. We have 2 dots there, I think, yeah, 2 dots there right on the line. So you see these kids are just kind of in the average, and so that's a little bit more concerning because we want to be above average. So what we're hoping is that with enough of these cases, we may actually have our own sort of normative data for kiddies who are being trained in typical language and learning environments. And here's a conversational turns normative table. I won't take the time to walk you through it, but again, there's nice normative data available, and it's available freely online in those references that I've provided for you. So conversational turn is calculated on the basis that somebody initiates a conversation and somebody responds, and the response is within a 5-minute period. So here's the conversational turn counts. Again, the solid line is the normative data, and we see how our children are doing. And we have a number, if you look at sort of the little grouping on the left there, we have a number of kiddies who are nicely above sort of what the average is. We have some more that a little bit, we have one way up there at the top. You'll see at the top of your screen, we have one who's well above, and so lots of conversation happening, lots of conversational turn taking. That's all good stuff. We have some others that are a little bit more borderline. So again, that gives us information that we can then sit down as a therapist, as a teacher, and have a little chat with the parents, not in a scolding way, but in an encouraging way, to say, gee, let's really work. It's almost like having a Fitbit or something, you know. You've got so many footsteps in, you've got so many counts in this day, is like you're sort of competing with yourself. And so we can almost use it like that to say to the parent, what we really want you to work on is getting this up even higher. You're doing well, let's get it even better. And again, child vocalization's normative table. We won't spend any time on that because you can have a look at it yourself, and it's available there online for you. And here's the child vocalization count. Again, for the most part, and we were really happy to see this because what we want to see is that we're above the average. And so what we see for the most part is that we're seeing more vocalizations than the average. These kiddies are really vocalizing, but we have a few outliers there, a few exceptions below that black line. And so those are the ones that we're going to be more concerned about and really use this to be coaching and counseling the parents. This is just a plot of the kiddies who had multiple recordings. And so you see that it varies from one day to the other, and that's just life. Life varies from one day to the other. We're in different environments, different listening environments, and so it's nice to be able to do this on several days. So what we're asking the families is to take it home. What our therapist, after testing it out and only getting one recording, what our therapist said, who started using it, is said, you know, it'd be really nice to have it over a 3 or 4 day period so that we really get a good snapshot of what's happening in this family's life. And with the feedback that we got from the parents too, who took it for one day and said, well, you know, it wasn't really a typical day because we had a birthday party or because, you know, something happened in the household, as things do. And so getting a broader snapshot over a number of days is important. I just want to take a minute to look at this one with you. We had some of the kiddies, here's an example of 3 children who used it at home, and they were also in daycare, and they used it in daycare. And that was really important for the therapist, is to have sort of a home day and a daycare day. And you can see the difference in the home. So for example, if you look at this first one, the blue and red one on your screen, the blue bars are what's happening in the home, and the red bars are what's happening in the daycare. And you can see a fairly important difference for some of these kids in terms of the adult word counts that are happening in the home versus in the daycare. So they're not hearing as much good adult information in daycare. If you look at the next one, you see the child turn taking. Again, for some of the children, not as much happening. And that's not surprising. Now, that's not to say that's a bad thing. We want these kiddies to be out in daycare for socialization, and it's just the reality of modern living, is that kids are in daycare. But again, this kind of gives a snapshot of how these different environments can look. If we look at input, the adult word count versus the child turn taking, in an ideal world we'd see these matching. You know, with input we get output, and they're fairly close. Most of them follow fairly close to the line, but again, we have some slight differences. Here's meaningful speech and outcome. If we look at these dots again, we're getting mostly the children are spending well above average time in meaningful speech, and that's because we've spent, you know, a couple of years with some of these families teaching them to offer a very meaningful environment for their child, provide rather a very meaningful environment for their child. Here's a comparison of meaningful and distant speech. And what we want to see is a lot of meaningful speech and not so much distant speech. And in fact, with most kiddies, we're seeing a lot of meaningful speech here. That's the light purple bars. Okay, so before we wrap up, which we'll do in a couple of minutes, I'd like to give you, I chose an example of sort of our best performing child, if you want, the family where we saw the best kind of level of stimulation at home, and then the worst. And so you just kind of see, I think, on your screen, as I walk you through these, kind of the contrast and how it might be useful to use something like the LENA system to, again, help to sort of, you can get a good snapshot and help to encourage the families. So if you look at the left of your screen, that was sort of our best performing child. And across the bottom are the different hours, the word counts, so the bars are the word counts at each different hour. And you can see that we were getting adult words right across the whole day, right from early in the morning to the evening when we measured there. With the child on the right, for example, which was kind of our worst performing child, we had some good things happening earlier in the morning, but then you sort of see these holes on the graph, and so that's when the child wasn't getting exposed to very much in terms of adult words. So it gives a pretty clear snapshot of what's going on there. Same thing, same child, conversational turns, you see lots of bars on your left, not so many on your right, or you sort of see these holes on your right. So not so much happening in terms of conversational turns. Exact same thing, exact same pattern, child vocalization. So you see this kind of all kind of fits together. Lots of vocalizations happening for the child on the left, child on the right, lots of holes, lots of things going, lots of things not happening. Had a very rich period, though you see that high bar there in the evening, had a very rich period, and I think that happened to be when Dad came home or something, and we really saw that coming through. And that's where having the little journal from the parents can help in interpreting the data as well. Here's a snapshot of the audio environment for these two children. And so what we hope to see is a lot of that light blue, because that light blue, and you can read through what the different bars are, that light blue is the meaningful speech. And so what we'd love to see across the whole day, to the extent possible that the families can do it, is lots of that. You see a lot on the left. You don't see quite as much on the right. You see more of the darker blue, the distant speech, okay? So there, again, that's where we can really use it and give the parents a really nice visual of what's happening, what to do, and how to change things over time. That's just a composite view. I'll let you take a look at that yourselves of the different audio environments, and what's happening more specifically with these children. So it's kind of just grouping together what I've just talked about in one snapshot for you. So what we've learned is that LENA is certainly very feasible to use. The parents are accepting it. Sometimes a little bit challenging to coordinate it with their everyday schedules, they say. What we're finding, and we're very happy about this, is that the children seem to be in rich, nice, rich learning environments, because that's what we've taught the parents to do. It's really helpful. The therapists are really liking it for coaching the parents, for counseling them and guiding them, and really helpful sort of for us to be able to view different environments that the children might be in, and with different people as well, with mom versus dad, etc. So multitude of uses that I think you'll find if you have a chance to use this. So again, here's some suggested readings for you. Lots of excellent information on the LENA website. I encourage you to go there, and even if you're not going to be using LENA, there's just some really good information there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this lecture on, particularly on LENA and how we can use it to encourage those rich foundations in language and literacy that are so important to our children. I think, as you can see, I'm kind of really excited about what we can learn. We've learned a lot from just using LENA in the clinic. I think we have a lot more to learn. I think it has a lot of potential, a lot of promise for us in terms of guiding and coaching parents. So lots more to come. Stay tuned, and thank you for joining us in the lecture, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.